This meeting is now being recorded.
So yeah, welcome everybody.
There we
and
go.
We'll start in with the events and collaboration news from really all three organizations. I didn't do the TWG logo. I've just got INCOSE in general, which includes, of course, our friends in the UK on the rig, and APTA. So welcome to both groups, and we'll do a more formal version of this on November 19th. We want to encourage everybody to sign up for at least one of the two groups. It doesn't preclude you from joining or participating in these discussions, but it may mess up some of the invitations. We're trying to organize the mailing lists, and we've got privacy law to contend with as well, and also respect people's wishes. So we're working those logistics out now. We're going to have some version of a concatenated approach to the mailings. You'll have to forgive us. You might get a few double invitations over the next few months as we sort all this out. So events, of course, IW is going to be virtual in January, so check the INCOSE website, incose.org. IS deadlines for papers are coming up in sort of shortly, right around the time of our next meeting, actually. I don't know the exact date, but check the INCOSE website again for details. For APTA, the Transcend Conference is coming up rather sharply on October 21st and 22nd. Of course, it's virtual. Looks like a pretty good lineup of events. I believe there's a fairly decent amount of COVID news and information in that event. And then similarly, the Transportation Research Board is having their 100th annual meeting. So that's kind of exciting. So we want to encourage anybody in the rail and transit industry to attend that. They have some extremely interesting COVID-19 discussions going on there. And then as far as our groups go, we're gonna concatenate or sort of co-do these monthly meetings as we kind of started doing last month, and keep a steady heartbeat going. As I mentioned earlier, the MOU is signed, and November 19th is going to be our official collaboration launch. We'll have the presidents with welcome messages to both organizations. Kind of an exciting event, and we're really hoping that the scarcity of very precious volunteer resources, with everybody working from home, and we're all fortunate to have jobs. Of course, a lot of folks don't because of this pandemic, but that does put extra strain, I think, on everybody's working time versus volunteer versus family time. So we really appreciate that, and we're going to do our best to leverage that precious volunteer effort. So at the bottom bullet, we need you. So we're looking for active volunteers to assist in the efforts, and hopefully we can stimulate some thinking in that regard today. The reality of COVID-19, as the slide shows, is there's a lot of empty conference halls all over the world. But we're going to keep the heartbeat going and keep the interest alive. So without any further ado, a quick recap on this systems integration and engineering standard proposal that we came up with on the APTA subcommittee. I'm just wondering, none of the pop-ups that are coming up on my screen are showing, are they? Or you're just seeing the slide deck, I'm hoping? Real quick.
Yeah, here we are.
Okay, good, cool. Yeah, just a sanity check, trying to remain employed for now. So the trend is, of course, answering the question of why. This is pretty obvious, but doesn't hurt to restate it. We've got an increasing level of system complexity. We get a perfect storm where we got massive projects. We've got increasing organizational complexity between, on those projects between the various organizations, and sometimes the folks involved in a massive project are fierce competitors in other projects. So that becomes an interesting storm. We've got technology complexity, which I think is on the next slide, increasing, actually literally exponentially. And you have to ask, who is the systems integrator when this happens at a transit agent? Who really owns it? And this is kind of the logical progression that we went through back in 2018. We were asking that question at an APTA rail meeting. We looked at what are the existing references and standards. There's a lot of stuff out there. So why do we need another, yet another one? And I've got the gentleman carrying all the paperwork around on the left there. And then we're going to just give you a quick glimpse of the proposed framework of the standard. I won't belabor this. Everybody knows there's millions of lines of code in the new vehicle controllers and CPTC, ATS systems. But it is kind of interesting to note that for most of our personal educational careers and our life cycle, we've kind of gone from a world of mechanical complexity to very complex systems of systems. So that is the literal exponential increase in interfaces and complexity. And anybody that's recently had a smartphone revision forced on them can see the results of that sometimes. So here's a scenario that we talked about at the APTA Rail conference when we were first discussing this. You've got supplier A, they've got a COTS product. It could be a PLC for a tunnel ventilation system. I'm just picking that one out of the blue. Supplier B maybe is providing the civil works, the enabling works for the the motor control center that connects to the PLC for tunnel ventilation. As a solid practical example. But those interfaces weren't necessarily well identified up front. They both come on site and deliver some level of functionality. The motor works, the concrete is fine, and hopefully the conduits and all the buried materials in the concrete line up. That's rare, but it could happen. The aggregate system, though, doesn't work. There's late defects. Maybe the PLC doesn't talk well to the train control system, or the sensors aren't working because of EMI. But the primes, the subs, the suppliers, they're pretty much paid. They're off-site. So who owns it? The agency does. They weren't maybe the de facto or the plan systems integrator at the start of that project, but in the end, the owner became the integrator, and it's not a good way. So the moral of the story is you can either do systems integration or have it done to you. So one of the reasons projects fail is poor missing interface control documentation, where the suppliers never have that conversation up front, or the project doesn't. There's always the big bang approach, where you just plug it all in and hope for the best. Cause and effect become just frightening. The integration team is often either missing or ad hoc. Once again, the prime and subs might be off the job, but you really need to clarify roles, accountability, for each interface. So if you've got weak or missing foundational processes like QA, configuration management, or V&V, if those are somewhat ad hoc, for instance, if you don't have configuration management, how are you going to integrate things? That will definitely cause failure of integration. And if you don't have some level of QA, all the processes fail. It's just human nature. So that's just a caveat. So we took a look at the existing references and standards. 15288 has 84 pages. There's two, sort of focusing on integration. Federal Highways did a wonderful job with the ITS handbook. It's quite extensive. There's lots of great templates in there online, free to use, Word templates, Excel. I think there's Excel stuff in there too. It's around 300 pages. The INCOSE fourth edition of the handbook, published now by Wiley, is around 400 pages, and that's going to be going to revision 5 in the not too distant future. Those of us on TWG are involved in that editing process. But none of these guidance, these are guidance documents, and they're intended to be used as that. And you shouldn't really have a statement in an RFP. You shall comply with the INCOSE handbook, and I've actually seen that. Like, how do you verify that requirement? So, and the bottom line is, how does a large civil contractor who is usually owning the whole job, and the person putting in the train control system is an afterthought sub to the civil works, how do they wade through it and comply with it? Well, they don't. They ignore a lot of this systems thinking or systems lifecycle approach, or they negotiate as much of it away as they can. That's been some practical experience. So what will this proposed APTA standard do? The idea is it'll distill and consolidate, what we have in the way of requirements from all these great global standards and reference guides. The idea is to focus on integration right at the beginning, from cradle to grave of the project. And then, as a practical matter, we're hoping to really create a very process focus that really speaks to our needs in this industry, using the terminology that, quite frankly, is more common in civil and infrastructure world than it is in control system design or computer land. So a possible future goal would actually be to use the refined process spec so that an organization could actually become perhaps certified to it, through some sort of a third party. That's an aspiration maybe in the future, kind of like ISO 9001, but just something to dream about. So the working approach we had on this, as I said, it started in 2018 after some discussions based on the previous summary slides, and we came up with kind of five work threads. And the two main ones that sort of shook out at the beginning were developing business case library to show successes and failures of not doing systems integration or systems engineering well. And the main author, the main document authoring, of course, it's very attractive to engineers, because engineers and technical people all like to create something, and that's how you get volunteers to stay with an organization, quite frankly. If you're always just talking about stuff, then that's interesting, and you can go to presentations, but it might not, convince people to become super enthused. But if they're getting a chance to create and contribute, that's I think for most engineers a more interesting reason to give up your free time or your family time to work on this stuff, which is a pretty important consideration in a volunteer group. So we should talk for a second a little bit about the title, the document, the rationale for that. So systems engineering has always been problematic in our industry, rail and transit, and really we're talking about civil infrastructure, which is ironic because systems engineering, if nothing else, is arguably centered around excellence in communications. One of the INCOSE outgoing presidents in his speech said, if you learn nothing else from all this, it really is about communications and really excellence in communications. So I've always remembered that. So the phrase systems engineering, is problematic because it's a contraction of subsystems engineering in the civil architectural world. So what it really means is, heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, electrical, IT, comms, train control, basically everything that isn't, kind of rebar and concrete. And I'm not disparaging any of our civil friends. It's just, the way it's used in that, and has been for hundreds, if not thousands of years, actually. Civil engineering is a pretty old profession, much older than electrical. And nobody's seen an electron yet anyway, I don't think. So we always have that interesting discussion. So some synonyms that have been helpful are like holistic engineering, holistic thinking, systems integration. So the key words that kind of come out of all that are the words integration, which, and I always use kind of this CNN talking head test on these things. So if you said, integration to somebody, just a layperson walking down the street, or you're trying to interview folks, they kind of know what engineering is sometimes, and they have a feel for what integration is. But that definitely rings fairly true in a transit agency, at least in North America, and we can certainly talk about that. The title isn't frozen in stone. It's just, this whole thing is a proposal. So if we come up with a better title, excellent, looking for input. So what does this thing look and feel like? So here's the draft table of contents, the usual suspects: foreword, introduction, scope, normative reference terms and defs. This is a big one though, organizational readiness. So some sort of capability maturity model that a transit agency could potentially use. The impact of contract mechanisms gets kind of blown by. in a lot of cases, but super critical. Obviously taking systems lifecycle approach. I won't go through them all, but the ones that one of the first ones we focused on, and I'm going to show you a sample of it in a second, is configuration management. Integration planning, of course, because we kind of talked about that earlier. What other? Stakeholder engagements, again, somewhat of a soft skill that sometimes gets glanced over by techies. ICTs, that's pretty obvious. And I lost a slide somewhere. Okay, well, that'll be shorter. So the reason we said configuration management is as a first example, it's cross-cutting and it's foundational. Without CM, good luck trying to do requirements management successfully or integrating systems. It's often, from my experience and many others, sporadic. It's somewhat ad hoc sometimes, and it's not for a lack of trying. It's just, and INCOSE has issued, I believe, a challenge to the tool manufacturers towards the idea of global configuration management. When you've got multiple DOORS databases and multiple document management systems across, 13 suppliers and 20 consultancies, it can be quite a nightmare. So it's pretty key. Now that's just a note on the bottom reminding me that we are going to add some readability features. So you're seeing the draft in the next slide here. So this is kind of the first section that we've actually done and partially reviewed. It's not an eye chart. You won't be able to read it, but so we kind of go through a very brief introduction, show the system life cycle, talk about how configuration management in a sort of a document tree and process tree works. We have a very simple definition of the process with an IPO, input-output graphic, similar to what INCOSE and of course QA groups are familiar with. We have some very specific ideas towards what the configuration management plan should be in the planning process. But here's a lot of the real meat and potatoes is going to be, and we're hoping to do this for every section, is things like advice and pitfalls. So we kind of do a quick introduction, and then here's the advice. Here's things, like don't set up a change control system as a separate silo activity from configuration management. That kind of thing. Require that the configuration register is fully integrated with your asset management register. So these are lessons learned and all up for debate, but this is our first cut at it. And then of course we want additional references, which will probably actually be hyperlinks potentially to either those organizations, or if it's within INCOSE or APTA, we could do a direct. I got to look at the time here. I got to close this off real quick. We had to take a detour though because of this pandemic. So we thought, okay, well, let's see how we can contribute to the APTA COVID-19 task force report. So we wanted to do some systems thinking perspectives. So we came up with, I think there's 5 or 6 threads of this, and that's what we've been doing over the last few months. It's obviously still a work in progress. All of this is. So we're kind of looking at a hybrid functional model to help guide us, through our work. So this is like an entire transit agency. I know you can't read it, but it's trying to capture the functionality of a full transit agency, genericized. And then the 5 threads, myself and Terry have been working on stakeholder management and risk management. Mike, who's on the call, has been working on consolidated, sort of a life cycle approach to program management, systems engineering, and asset management. John's been doing some excellent work, and I can't see the list, so I'm not sure if he joined the call, but on systems modeling and how that can help guide us through the COVID-19, both the triage phase and then sort of what's the future hold. Bridget is going to contribute a lot of good stuff on the organizational change management, because that's going to be required. There's a lot of people involved in when you're changing and reacting to a bio threat at a transit agency. And a very specific and very interesting one that Sergio is going to be guiding through is tunnel ventilation, but HVAC in general. And we're hoping to collaborate with ASHRAE on this because they are quite expert on heating, ventilating, and air conditioning in transit agencies, and obviously stations and platforms. There's a lot of airflow things to consider, and now that COVID-19 is confirmed by many scientific folks anyway as being aerosolized, it's something to think about. I think there was actually just an article in the the Times, I think, on what the airflow is like in a transit vehicle. So, and then also just real quick, Dennis had mentioned earlier that the UK Project Management Society, APM, have some interesting systems viewpoints on how they're dealing with this. So that's a real quick whirlwind tour of what we're up to at APTA on this systems integration and engineering standard proposal. And I believe it is exactly 2:30. So I'm just going to stop sharing temporarily. We could take a couple of quick questions on this while just to give Dave a bit of a buffer to join, and I also have to find the other presentations. Okay, so if I start sharing again here, any questions on any of that while I'm searching?
Well, your point, this is Vijay, your point about civil structures and how do we integrate the systems component into it, and because at the end of the day they just glaze over it. So unfortunately, if there is any teeth within the contractual language, these challenges we are going to get exposed. So I'm working on at least a couple of projects right now, one at MARTA that David would know very well, and the other one at LA Metro. So the LA Metro is a transit corridor, Crenshaw Transit Corridor, and the systems component of Crenshaw Transit Corridor is the one that is creating a delay. At the end of the day, commissioning is all about systems, nothing about structures and things along those lines. So unless and until you have teeth in the contractual language to making it deliver the way that we are asking it to be delivered, it's going to be really challenging to hold the contractor's feet to the fire. That basically means that we need to work all the way from stakeholders, requirements, bringing everybody together, and all those things. So the more time that we can put in a little bit on the front end of it to really come up with the right package of requirements and all the interface documentation, the better it is on the back end. So that is the education that we need to provide to the transit industry, especially on all these kind of things. I mean, these are systems of systems at the end of the day, and that is what we need to do. I mean, luckily for us, Dave can vouch for it. I mean, we created a spec package on the MARTA side for a train control upgrade program, and then it does not matter how our contractor or supplier goes around it. We can bring him back to the specifications to say this is where we mentioned it. So yes, we spent a little bit of time right up front, but unfortunately, the vendor community is not ready to get their to get their feet held to the fire. So it's an overall an education process on both sides.
Yeah, thanks, Vijay. Just going to check real quick here. Dave, are you on? I can't see who's on the call. So
David is on the call.
I'm on the call. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, we'll hold off maybe any further questions, and then just respecting everybody's time, we'll dive into to this presentation, if that's okay, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely, Dale. So we're going to cheat here, Dale. We're going to use our initials up on the top of the slides to cheat. So nobody look at the initials, so Dale and I can actually know which slides we're speaking to.
That way we sound professional.
Yeah, we sound professional. Yeah. So the discussion today, real quick, we're going to talk a little bit about MARTA and our journey and our roadmap. And Dale covered the SIE standard pretty well. And then obviously we took a detour with COVID. So we'll just advance to the next slide, Dale.
Thanks, Dave.
So MARTA at a glance, real quick. I won't go through all the details.
We cannot see any slides.
Yeah, there might be a delay. I can see it, Dale.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Well, now I can't see it.
Oh, going on.
There's no one is sharing.
says stop sharing.
Now I see it.
Oh dear. Global Meet.
Hopefully it might take some time because I cannot see. Okay. Good.
Oh, let me go back to, hang on. We didn't have that trouble when I wasn't in full screen mode, so I'm going to go back to this mode. Is that legible at least?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, cool. I'll just leave it in this. Maybe this will work faster or better.
Well, great. Just, I mean, the point of this slide is we've got bus, rail, and streetcar, large agency, heavy rail transit, streetcar, large bus deployment, quite a bit of service here in the Atlanta region. Next slide, Dale.
Okay.
And so this is really an important slide here for grasping where we're at as an agency. We're 40 plus years old. I call us middle-aged. Heavy rail, streetcar, bus, and mobility. There's no snickering there, Dale. So the first 20 years, we were really in a system expansion mode. We were building, and then we got into this situation where we were in a system preservation mode. Really hadn't built anything since the 2000s. So, we were able to get our house in order, pursue ISO 55000, do a lot of maintenance work, do a lot of rehab projects, but now we are facing a situation where we've got a state of good repair backlog. At the same time, the Atlanta region has passed a couple of referendums, and we're going to be having competing interests, which is get down the backlog and expand the rail system. Next slide, down.
Okay.
Hey, Dave, sorry to interrupt. There are two people, Derek and Oliver, can't see the slides.
I can't see it either. I can't see it either. They haven't come up.
VJ doesn't have it either.
Okay, can you see it, Hokie?
Derek.
Well, I can see it.
Derek. Hi.
Yeah, Dale's driving the slides. I can see it.
Well, I'm hoping the recording captures it. Apologies to anybody that can't. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, one suggestion is to maybe to rejoin if you cannot see. Yeah, just try to.
Good idea.
Yeah.
And worst case, hopefully the recording will come out okay.
The recording has the screen. So.
Okay, good. So yeah, sorry if you can't see. Thanks.
Yeah, let's keep going. Yep.
Okay, Dale. Well, I'll carry on here, and then we'll go. So this slide here is it's a bit of humor, but it's called system fatigue, and it shows somebody with their head down on their desk, missing pouring their coffee into their coffee cup. And the point here is at about the 30-year mark, 25 to 30-year mark, we started seeing fatigue on the system, and we started seeing a drop in performance. And we realized we had a lot of subject matter experts that could maintain a system, could identify problems, but to really cobble together a procurement document, to put an approach together, to write specs, to really do config management and really know how to tackle the problem and reinvest in the system and then deliver on a project. We were short on expertise in that area. So we realized that we needed some sort of systems area of expertise and started building back our systems engineering group. Next slide, Dale. Okay. So defining the problem, and there's a slide here if you can't see, but I'll just read, given 1 hour to save the world, I spent 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes finding the solution. When we have these big elephants in the room and we're trying to solve these major systems issues and rehabilitate an old 60s, 70s, 80s technology, even mid-90s technology to try to bring it into 2020, doing that transition is incredibly difficult because you're going from old technology and maybe marginal config management to new technology, new requirements, new business processes, new training, and you've got to manage config management and change control through all of this. So to some folks, it could be daunting, and that's why the SE approach is incredibly beneficial. Next slide, Dale. So getting started, there's another quote here. It says, most of the problems in life are because of two reasons. We act without thinking, or we keep thinking without acting. So, we've got to put our words into actions and deliver on this. And really what it's going to take is it's going to take an understanding of what is systems engineering. And I say this all the time, us technical people, we're terrible marketers. We know what we know, and we don't understand why everybody else doesn't get it, because it seems simple to me, and why isn't this being embraced? So, you know, one of the things we need to work on is education within our agency, and I heard this before in Dale's presentation, is education across the consulting, contractors, and supply chain. We're doing a rail car build here in Atlanta with a rail car builder, and we wrote a very detailed spec, a lot of effort. And the first thing we encountered is, well, we don't build the car the way you wrote the spec. Our sequence is different, and we don't want to comply with the requirements of the spec in that order. And we're like, well, you didn't take any exceptions. The requirements are very clear. You know, please explain to me why you can't meet the requirements. So even if you write the best specifications and requirements matrix, there's got to be an appreciation for how the contractor and supply chain deliver their products, build a car, onboard their contractors, and actually make payments to their contractors. So, you know, you can write the best requirements document in the world, and it will fail miserably because the industry that you picked to deliver the product is just not in tune with how you've requested to have the vehicle built. Next slide, Dale. So just real quick, you got to build advocacy here. In any situation, the best thing you can do is the right thing, right? The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing, and the worst thing you can do is nothing. So, you know, we all know that we have technology changing over. We all know we have aging agencies, and we all know we're going to have to take this journey together. So, you know, we need to pool our resources, work together, and there's a lot of regulation that's coming out, you know, and I've said this before, you know, hazard management, systems engineering, config management, and safety requirements are all coming to a head here. So anyone who isn't in tune with really understanding what they own, what its condition is, how to replace it, and then to deliver on projects that can renew and refresh the agency, we will not be competitive as an agency. Mobility is a competitive market right now, and if we're not nimble and agile, we're going to suffer. And right now, obviously, we're suffering with COVID, with the drop in ridership. And I can tell you, in Atlanta, it is not rebounding. It's gotten flat, and it's staying flat. Dale, next slide. And Dale, I think if you want to take it from here, Dale, I just want to plug the fact that you know, MARTA has really invested in processes, and I believe we're probably one of the only agencies that's 9001, 55,001, and 14,001, and obviously that's a major achievement for the agency. But we actually believe that having these processes in place makes us a better agency. And Dale, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so it's, you know, it's obviously a journey. There's a lot of standards listed up here, and it's trying to show that in the sort of the Venn diagram view of the world, systems engineering, systems thinking really pulls a lot of perhaps prior disparate approaches together. There's a huge overlap with the PMI, and that's why INCOSE has a great MOU and collaborative arrangement with PMI. And you know, I'm excited about the possible collaboration with the equivalent, I believe, which is APM in the UK, especially, you know, working on this COVID response and the task force, as mentioned in the previous discussion. So and we also talked about this previously. You know, there's an awful lot of stakeholders. If you're designing something like a passenger information system, you know, no single group has enough competence, and it really gets back to competence to generate the contract documents. And like Dave was saying just a minute ago, there's the whole procurement angle on this. You know, what kind of a contract vehicle do you use? And if procurement isn't involved in this, if legal isn't involved, and something that is so subjective, like graphical user information, you know, on a passenger information system, you know, you're probably going to fail, because really the stakeholders view, you know, what their perception is kind of is how the project lives or dies. Here's a version of the swing diagram, which we customized for this presentation for transit and rail. Just a little bit of humor to wake everybody up. So what the owner RFP stated, what the engineer designed, you know, looks pretty cool. The drawings show, looks like the Taj Mahal for a substation building or something. The PMO, we're trying to save money and schedule, so they're just going to run the wires across the tracks and minimize everything. And this is not meant to disparage anybody, but it's just some humor. The contractor, they sort of read something literally and said, oh, okay, as close to the tracks as it can be. We'll just put it right on the tracks and be safe. Obviously very silly, but there's actually a picture of that, which I didn't plagiarize, that shows that exact situation, which is unbelievable. But here's what the owner really needed. There's always a difference sometimes between what the RFP stated and what they needed, depending on how well that front end stuff was done. So the terminology, we already talked about that a little bit, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to emphasize that if SE is about communication, we really need to be careful. I think, it's important to be as precise as we can in our communication. So if we're talking about a subsystem, try to use subsystems, that sort of thinking, and just recognize that you might be talking past somebody, or you might be having a conversation about systems engineering and they're thinking HVAC and you're thinking INCOSE. So that's a really important, could be humorous, except, it's our daily lives. So obviously there's a lot of process tools. Most people on this call will be quite familiar with the INCOSE collection of lifecycle processes. There's foundational cross-cutting, and this is sort of a view, a snapshot, almost like a dashboard of a typical, I think, North American transit agency, where things like information management, configuration management, risk management might be lower priorities. I mean, everybody does PM at some level. Everybody's going to do implementation and design. Engineers love to design stuff. You may or may not get to some level of system requirements definition, and you're probably going to do verification. And integration, I left it yellow because sometimes it is left to the end, so it's kind of a lower priority. It's not at the beginning of the life cycle. That's just another way of showing that kind of relative to all the INCOSE tools in the toolbox. So the MARTA journey was foundations. So change control, capital planning using a risk-based approach, and requirements. Eventually we'll get to requirements reuse and contract development. So this was kind of the roadmap we had, with the foundations being configuration management. So that's change management, document control, and of course configuration management itself. Review and approval processes, risk management processes, and trying to harmonize these across the agency so everybody isn't kind of doing their own, for instance, change control process. That's specifically prohibited in the Title 49 regulations, actually. So you take small bites of the elephant. You attack the processes that make sense. I'm going to jump ahead here to this. So this was our discussion on change control. It's a key pillar of the ISO 10007 configuration management standard, and it's really critical to the success of any transit agency's system safety program plan. This is. Oh, actually, I'm going to let Dave jump in here. I just noticed the initials changed, so go for it, Dave.
Thanks, Dale. Yeah, I just think, the point Dale's making is, and I'm going to say this, and we're deviating from the slides, is anyone who's working in the industry right now, the regulations are all about hazard prevention, mitigation, and risk. They don't want to give us money that we can't spend and use wisely, and the project doesn't get done. And the other thing is they want us to be in tune and really use data to analyze and do predictive analysis of what is the condition of our system, because there isn't an infinite amount of money, and you're not going to be able to replace everything at the same time. So you have to prioritize and be very selective. So most agencies are going to have to evolve towards a risk-based or operationally critical portfolio. What do I need to keep my business running? And how do I reduce risk to keep bad things from happening? And how do I mobilize that and put that into a contract mechanism to deliver on it? Next slide, Dale. And you can just tap through that. That's exactly what I just spoke about right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And change control, and I know, Dale, you get your cartoon here, but I like the expression getting change control under control, because once change control starts rolling downhill, and you don't manage it, your config management, your baseline documents, if you didn't have time and money to do these projects to begin with, you're definitely not going to have the time or the money to do this work if you don't have proper change control. So Dale, I'll send it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So we came up with a fairly lean stage-gated process based on 5, again, trying to use systems engineering as we develop systems engineering, 5 key requirements. Eliminate any unilateral change agents. An example of that would be some person with the best of intentions, either in technology or perhaps in the, out in the vehicle maintenance fleet or the fleet maintenance team, and they make a change because they're just trying to keep the fleet running, and keep availability up, but they may have made it may have unintended consequences, and there's lots of examples of that throughout the industry. Making it risk-based, as Dave just said, is really at the heart of the process. And if you do it carefully, if you do it with a lot of thought in sort of the GUI and sort of the tool and the approach, and by GUI I also include the paper form, because we did this whole thing on paper first, and we ran through some tests with test subjects, like how does this process flow? What does it feel like? Can you imagine if this was on the screen, what would it look like? So we really were trying to drive a tool flow using the process, as they teach you in their Lean Six Sigma class, process always before tools. Don't let the tool vendor tell you how to run your business. So you want it to be executed in minutes or less for simple low-risk changes. You have to build an evidence collection, because people are people and they'll take a shortcut if they can. You make it hard, they won't do it. And then you also have to be able to demonstrate due diligence. You need an audit trail. So we came up with a prototype system in QuickBase. Actually, we're able to put it together fairly quickly, and started training folks at MARTA. And we have a sample screenshot from that here. And then the eventual goal is to get this into the Oracle unifier system, so that it's got full single sign-on, access and security privileges for all MARTA employees and staff. We obviously have change control procedures, and we have a process spec, and GDOT, which is the FTA representative in Georgia, of course, accepted that as a serious component of the MARTA System Safety Plan, program plan. And Dave, capital planning.
Thanks, Dale. And the other thing too is we also used a little bit of this model in our 55,000 certification process, because each department that has a large asset portfolio has to have some form of config management, because the way they look at this is rail is managing rail assets, and bus is managing bus assets, and vertical transportation is managing their assets as well, and state safety oversight is really all over this stuff. So again, taking a risk-based approach, we're illustrating a slide here where we actually put a budget line item in our capital program now on configuration management, because we realize how important it is to the authority. Next slide, Dale.
Okay.
So our CIP priority cross-check, very important. Everyone has lots of models. Models give you what you put into the model, and sometimes you're an architect and you're dictating what you want the model to tell you, but we're using a couple of different models, and Dale, I'll just click to the next slide here so we can make good sense out of the 3 models that we use. So if we're going to use an asset management analogy here, we have a tool, FTA Term Light, accessible through the FTA website, and a lot of folks are using it to run analysis. But then we have a comparative analysis tool, which is Expert Choice, which was more an open platform, and MARTA filled in what they felt were priorities, and everything from age, condition, deliverability, grant funds. We threw this into a model and asked the model to tell us, if you only have X amount of dollars and you've got to fit the fit the projects underneath a curve. What is the best portfolio of projects to invest your money in based on how MARTA prioritized it? And then again, we did that, but also we wanted to cross-check it against a pure risk process. And this is where Dale and myself and some staff here at MARTA combined resources, and it's really checking against these models to see, and everybody probably knows when you get folks in a room and you really start having conversations about where do you invest in an agency and how do you prioritize, you really got to talk to the subject matter experts and understand that models will give you results, but it may not give you the best investment of your portfolio. So Dale will step us through some of the different topics that fit into this cross-check model.
Thanks, Dave. So the 5 components are really looking at, we have to identify what the programs are and list them all out, and there's hundreds of them. We need to prepare what the risk, the risk factors. We looked at the system impact. We looked at how is the project executing, if it's already executing and is not sunsetting. How's it doing? What risks are currently ongoing empirically? And then, we come up with an overall risk score and notes, and then all of that kind of feeds into the chart that the logic diagram that was up above. We look at things like, what are the system requirements like? Is there even a ConOps? What's PMO doing? Are they well organized? Are there good schedules? Life cycle costing, was there a life cycle cost approach used or not? What's the work breakdown structure look like? So it's kind of the preparation risk. How prepared is this project? Was it just kind of thrown together quickly? Kind of thing. System impact risk. So these are a lot of the ilities. So safety, security. Do we match MARTA policy? Do we match regulations? How about the environment? And what about our friends in operations and maintenance? How are we doing with them? So what kind of impact to the system will the project make? Project health risk. So this is if it's executing, of course. How's the scope doing? If we got scope creep, how's the schedule? Budgetary wise, are we still on track? And of course, if there's some technical issues, like are we getting the specs and the responses back, the V&V evidence from the supplier? So we've called that a health risk. It's the health of the project for projects that are actually executing. We put it all together, and we get a risk, for each line item in the capital budget, each candidate, that's going to potentially receive funding, and we came up with, what the ranges are for a warning, for acceptable risk, or a very high risk, and that just shows a sort of a heat map of the risk threshold that we used. And I think, yeah, this is the last of kind of the journey slide, where the next step, of course, is I'll let Dave speak to this, and then.
Yeah, and Dale, so we've talked a lot about understanding what the problem is, teeing it up, making sure you're reducing your risk, but we're also talking about contract development here. Where this really goes is into the SIS, the Systems Integration Standard, and you can just tap Dale.
Okay.
Dale, I'll talk about this a little bit, and I'll let you polish it up here. But
sure.
What we realized is we have this huge portfolio, and we took our capital improvement program and we put it into what type of projects are we going to be doing: vehicle delivery, systems delivery, infrastructure rehabilitation. And we even have an element in our capital program which is called a non-asset category, which is things like underground storage tank and regulatory requirements and planning dollars and all sorts of things like that. So, the reality is, if you're going to start doing these systems, renewal projects and taking on new technology, the days of reverse engineering things and just making it work with your old infrastructure got to go away, because we will be a non-competitive industry. So, somebody in the agency needs to be strategizing on how do you take, unfortunately, what I'm going to say, old legacy procurement documents, master specs, and everything's sitting down in everyone's favorite department, which is the contracts group, right? You throw the lawyers in there, and we're really having a love fest. And what you need to figure out is, I hear you laughing, Dale. We're living this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So to have a systems integration standard, somehow to make sense of all this and not making it daunting for everybody, is very important, because if you don't, the results will just be worse. Go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, and that's kind of where we ended up in 2018 at APTA Rail, and we talked about the systems integration standard project, and back then we were just calling it systems integration. We've actually added the word systems integration and engineering just to bring that engineering flavor back into it. But the key word is probably and always will be systems integration. So the balance of the slides are a little bit similar to what I showed in the summary, but I'll go through them fairly quickly. And I had mentioned this earlier. You can either do systems integration right from the beginning or have it done to you. A little humorous picture there. Some poor engineer. And we talked about these sorts of issues with missing interface control documents, the Big Bang approach, put it all together at the end and hope for the best, sometimes called plug and pray. This is an important number, though, and I don't have a more up-to-date one, but if those of you may have heard of the chaos report done by the Standish Group every year. And in 2016, they recorded that out of 50,000 projects around the world, that's a pretty good sample size. Only 39% of them were on time, on budget, and to design specifications. Of those so-called, sort of successful projects, at least in the typical sense of the word, or lay sense of the word, I should say, of the successful ones, only 17 actually delivered what was needed. That's not great. That's a lot of, human capital and sweat equity and money wasted around the planet on very poorly done projects, sadly. So that's where we ended up with the systems integration standard, and then we ended up taking a detour through the COVID situation. So that's, I don't want to go through the SI for those of you that were on the beginning of the call. We've already talked about that, and the systems integration and engineering standard kind of we transitioned that workflow into temporarily into those five COVID task force streams that I had, that we mentioned earlier. So I think we could just, unless you wanted to add some stuff, Dave, we could just open it up for questions and maybe a bit of a roundtable discussion.
Yeah, Dale, I just wanted to make one quick mention, and I know we're going to be facing this challenge in Atlanta. You need to set up the process, and it needs to be repeatable, and you need to get the education out there, because we're now facing some turnover with some changing players in our staff, and we're losing advocacy. So folks that were on board in multiple departments that are either transferred, retiring, or whatever, when you lose that advocacy within the agency, and you start bringing a lot of folks on that maybe are more vertical construction oriented, they don't appreciate or understand, what we're doing here. So if you don't make it repeatable, codify the process and get it in place, it is bound to be changed by the next person that comes in and gets involved. So I'll kind of end with that, Dale, and put the floor back to you with the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That was perfect. Perfect ending. Actually, that's pretty true. So yeah, we'll just open it up to questions. I can't see all I can see is my presentation. So Hoki, if you want to kind of manage that aspect of it, I don't know if people have hands raised or if there are messages coming through on the text.
Sure. Let's see. Well, Barbara asked a question from your first session. She asked, will you be posting a report on the COVID-19 effort?
Yeah, the intent is to actually, compile what we come up with. We'll submit that to the larger committee, sort of in the APTA scheme of things, and it'll be a contributing chapter. But in addition to that, what this is going to do is really this new threat vector, dealing with a biohazard, is something that a lot of military folks have to deal with, and I guess civil and infrastructure had to deal with it back in the days of I can't think of the name of the syndrome that got into all the buildings and the HVAC systems. It'll come to me in a second. But we're not used to dealing with necessarily in a day-to-day approach to our work biohazard, unless you design military equipment, and then they've got the nuclear, biological, chemical precautions and specific standards you have to meet. So this is going to be contributory, I think, to the systems integration and engineering standard in a very practical way. It might shine a light on things that we really need to look at up front, like operations concepts, maintenance concepts, organizational change management. We think is going to be a big deal, and part of that's like kind of what Dave just mentioned at the end, where organizations are changing, folks are retiring, knowledge is going out the door. So we have to codify some of this and make it part of the normal way of doing business. We have to basically tighten the ship a little bit. I don't know. Hopefully that was a long-winded answer, Barbara. Sorry. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, Dave.
No, Dale, I think I think you hit it on the spot. I'm making an observation here, and I'm looking at the 19 guests, and this is a great conversation, and hopefully folks are enjoying the presentations. But expanding our portfolio and reiterating again that the whole systems approach, and you go back to that diagram where you had everybody that needed to be involved to basically do an AVIS system, an audiovisual information system. And I think, the only way we're going to get more advocacy, and yeah, right there, Dale, is really to expand our portfolio and reach out to some other folks. And, it's not beyond me to say, I need to talk to my internal communications person at MARTA, or I need to talk to my marketing person at MARTA, or get a what I'm going to call an executive sponsor within the agency that actually believes in this stuff, because it's going to be tough sledding to bull over contracts and procurement or legal, or somebody who's really familiar and comfortable with doing typical CSI type stuff and vertical construction. So I think some of our energy, we need to continue to develop the systems integration standard, but I think we need to wrap our brains around how do we message that, how do we deliver that, and how do we show return on investment, because without that, it's not going to go anywhere.
Hi Dave, it's Derek Price.
Hi, Derek.
Yes. Yeah.
Hi. Really nice to see that journey MARTA's been on since first time we met 9 years ago, Dave. I think you're hitting all the right notes. One observation was thinking about what's happened over here is, I think maybe 20-25% of the effort went into, if you like, codifying, writing frameworks, writing guidance documents, informal standards, and the rest has gone into either stakeholder engagement, constant communication and briefing, working with the construction contractor organisations and procurement to get to the point where they see there's some bottom line benefit from it. I think what we've also seen is that only 1 or 2 projects over every 5 years seems to be in a sweet spot to move things on, and then everyone else kind of observes based on that. And it's hard to know where that step change is going to come from.
Yeah, I think you hit the mark with your comments, and I spent some time working, with TFL and LU and a lot of other organizations as well. And You know, I think the slippery slope here is people still have to run a business, and the supply chain still has to run a business, and car builders got to run a business. And if all this in theory looks like the perfect storm to ensure an outcome, I can tell you we put a contract together that was great systems requirements, but to the contractor, the schedule of values and the payments required a whole lot of work prior to getting systems approval, which meant it was a negative cash flow project for a contractor, and that just was was not good for business. And we had to figure out ways to keep the contractor alive during the contract because we wrote the requirements so restrictive. It was a one-way street. It was not a two-way street, right? So great point.
Yeah, I could just sort of tack onto that that discussion that that is one of the focuses, early focuses that we're looking at. You know, the impact of contract mechanisms and the organizational readiness is something that it is mentioned in the. I don't know if it's mentioned in the Federal Highways SE guide. I can't remember. It might be. It probably is. That's a pretty thorough document, and it's certainly mentioned in the INCOSE handbook. So we're looking for some practical do's and don'ts, some practical guidance on, you know, design build versus the other techniques, design bid build and that. We want to kind of collect that and organize it and kind of do a trade analysis. You know, we in all cases we're going to try to use as many of the systems engineering tools in the toolbox to help us create this standard. I didn't mention in either, I guess, of the previous discussions, we're trying to keep this thing out of the 300-page range because, you know, we just don't need, it's too much. So if we can keep it around 150, you know, that's kind of our top limit. We're trying to get closer to about 100 pages, really succinct, you know, with call-out boxes so somebody can flip to a chapter, either electronically or physical. And, you know, just in a almost at a glance, get the gist of, okay, why is configuration management important, or why should I consider another contract mechanism, or what you know, one of the recent discussions we've had is, what does a good organization look like, you know, as far as a multi-party, you know, with obviously some of these parties are actual fierce competitors in the marketplace. So obviously one of the parties is going to be the transit agency itself, the owner. You know, so how do you structure that? Where do you put program manager versus systems, or the engineering manager, I should say, not just systems engineering, and QA? You know, how do you position them so that there are clear, you know, there isn't too much span of control or too much influence, either on project schedule over safety and that sort of thing. So we're kind of looking at those as those organizational charts, basically.
One thing that does prompt, Dale, is the thought that the APTA standard, which would be a really useful piece, I think, is it going to seek to take account of the different scenarios each agency will find themselves in, whereas one extreme may say they've got nothing and they need to develop everything. Others may have 75% of the things in place, and they'll use this guide to top themselves up to 100%.
Yeah, that actually is the hope that we will. And
Right.
there was the where was it? Oh yeah, the organizational readiness. Yeah. So what we wanted to do, and I'm going to try to flip to, was it this slide here? Yeah, we're actually hoping that we can do an annual capability maturity audit for the, you know, the 30 life cycle processes that are in the 2015 version of the standard, and actually have the you know, the folks at each agency try to honestly score themselves against that, or potentially you could have a third party, you know, person come in and with the correct confidentiality, because there's probably some dirty laundry that you don't necessarily want aired in public. So But for each person, each agency, I should say, they should really want to measure themselves and benchmark themselves, and we could certainly anonymize it and kind of give a decent, like if all the agencies are, going back to that, if I can find it quickly, the INCOSE chart, the process chart. There it is. If all the, if it looks like your agency benchmarks very much lower in, if we had some scales, I'm going to pick on configuration management again. And it seems like everybody's doing a slightly better job than you are in configuration management, then you could focus some of your, well, if you consider process assets as part of your asset, management system at an agency. So if you might want to focus on that process area in particular, or maybe decision management, which is pretty tightly tied with risk management. You might find that you're kind of setting the standard for risk management approaches, and you don't have to spend much money on that. So that, yeah, sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but that's our hope, our aspiration, I should say. Go back to the standard here. Can find it quickly. Yeah, so this just real quick. So that was that capability maturity audit, which will help develop potentially an anonymized report with all 30 processes. That will inform a senior leadership team promotional kit. So if you could walk into your CFO's office and say, look, we are doing a fantastic job in these process areas, but we got to spend some money on this, then you can justify, and that would of course fit into the whole capital planning process. So distillation of global standards, we're actually doing that now actively. We're trying to, one thing I didn't mention is, as we called it an e-doc, but one of the companion things that would come out of this activity would be some reusable process requirements, like as a set. So for instance, you could literally take the, and we might do it as like a DOORS DPA file, or probably just a flat Excel file. Those will be very heavily reviewed, peer reviewed across multiple agencies, multiple countries, and you would have a pretty good sense of a set of validated requirements. They'll meet the ISO 29148 standard in the INCOSE. Obviously, they'll run through a cross-check of the INCOSE working group on requirements standard. So they'll be well-written, well-vetted requirements, and that set would be available for all the APTA members to deploy, so they can grab. They could either refer to that in their contract document as a requirement, or they could just suck them right in if they want to do it that way too. So that was kind of a companion output from this whole process, was reusable requirements, both in written and electronic form. And then the case studies library, of course, is going to generate lessons learned, which is going to inform the integration standard. Then out of all of that will come the necessary training materials, which will help hopefully every agency and supplier. And the training needs to be like real training, where you actually have to write a test, and there'll be some competency or some scores assessed to that. So for instance, here, one of the use cases or the scenarios for that was, you've got some suppliers that have just come on board, you've just awarded the contract, and you're doing the onboarding and the mobilization phase of a brand new shiny project. You want to run people through some pretty good training, so everybody's got the same sense of how this thing's going to work. Again, I'll pick on, it could be requirements management or configuration management. And so they go through the course, and they actually have to write a test at the end, which is recorded anonymously and electronically. Well, maybe not anonymously, but it's it's shared only to, you know, the management and the supervisors, not with coworkers. And that could give you a sense of, okay, what's the strength of my team? You know, where and you could potentially make adjustments, because sometimes, you know, folks are put on projects, you know, unfortunately for political reasons as opposed to competency reasons. This would be helpful to, you know, to try to get the highest quality team you can get. And also, if companies who are proposing members on a multi-party large project know that, you know, these folks are going to actually have to pass a test, you know, and as part of their onboarding and part of their training, and their employment on this project is, you know, subject to satisfactory completion, that gives you a bit of leverage. So that's just a conceptual thing right now, but we've been chatting about that a little bit too. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. Is it too draconian, too scary, or what? I don't think Dave and I have ever talked about this, so that's why I want to test the waters.
No, Adele, I agree with you. Just to comment, but you know, for what we're creating as a product, I think all this is relevant. But I'm going to go back to what I think Derek said about, and this goes to a little bit of your SE capacity in North America in particular. We struggle to find peer agencies that even have their arms wrapped around portions of this concept. So I think this is definitely a work in progress, and it needs a gentle approach, and just from my perspective, because I think it'll scare people off.
Nope, totally agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you there, Dave.
Excellent. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns, suggestions?
Yeah, Dale, I don't see any more questions, but Gordon has typed in the name of the disease as Legionnaire's disease.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I couldn't remember. Legionnaire's disease. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was a few years ago, but I just sort of remember the scare it put into everybody, you know, oh, gee, do I want to go into an office building or a hotel or whatever, you know, how well is it maintained? So, you know, here we go again. So, yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Hi, it's Derek again. I guess all I would add is to confirm I think the potentially massive return on investment in focusing on the softer side of things, which you've already mentioned a few times in terms of behaviours, you know, collaborating almost in spite of particular contract arrangements, does have a big return on investment in the long run.
Yeah, the people skills, the soft skills are so important, because often the technology, I mean, it's not always not the problem, but often it's not the problem. It fails at interfaces typically, of course, but organizations and organizational structures fail at organizational interfaces, you know, the same way. So I totally agree with you, Derek. Yeah, we have to do a better job of flexing our soft skill muscles and stretching them a little bit. And I think that's where the you know, for as far as the task force input goes, the contributions. Bridget, are you on the line? Or sorry, I can't see the line. So I think the organizational change management and the stakeholder engagement discussions are, you know, and research is going to help with some of that, because you know, you can't force people to be engaged. And I think there's some statistics that show that it's kind of shocking, actually, that there's a significant portion of any number of folks involved in a project, and I'm not going to recite the percentage, but it was a higher percentage than I thought, are actively in opposition to, you know, the goals of the project, and are potential saboteurs. And you really want to keep keep that to a minimum. I mean, it could be, by saboteur, it sounds very melodramatic, but I mean, it could just be passive aggressive, where they're so fed up, they don't like the way the project's being run or the organization's being run, and they just drag their heels. I mean, it could be just that, as opposed to, some level of enthusiasm and engagement. So the whole word engagement, we abuse the word, going back to the original opening statements on precision of communications in English, the concept of ownership. I mean, ownership implies an emotional component, that you really feel it, inside, that you own it. It's not the same as accountability. They're highly related, but ownership kind of ties into the engagement. So if you've got the traveling public, as an example, if they're going to be fully engaged in a discussion about transit, that's a good thing. And hopefully in a positive and constructive environment, which is really important. And that's part of the whole stakeholder management section that we're putting together, is how do you do that? And I know PMI has a lot of material on that, and we're going to collaborate with them. I'm guessing that APM in the UK also has taken a good study of that. So we're trying not to reinvent stuff, but we are trying to take some of that soft skill information, since we've got the collaborative tools to do it with now, through these MOUs between INCOSE and PMI, and now of course between INCOSE and APTA. So that soft skills thing is super important, and very often overlooked, because it's not as cool as designing a new control system. Well, any other thoughts from anybody, or Hokie, did you see anything more come through? Or
Dale, let me ask a question there.
Yeah,
this is Mike Murrah, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it, particularly you and Dave's double act there. It's really good to hear it from both sides, and covering this in this kind of way. I've been looking here in the UK over similar organizations, which I think there might be in the transit area, and maybe Derek will help me identify these, but or Dennis. But I think what you presented also would play very well in our maybe RIG audience. And anything like this, any of your speakers from APTA would be more than welcome at the UK INCOSE RIG for a presentation, or giving something of interest like this. And it's showing, working to standards, actually applying this across the organization. And I think there's some things that could be found out on this side, whether we're doing it over here or not doing it, or should be doing it at least as good as APTA. Huh? Any comments?
I think
yeah,
it's certainly worth exploring.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's certainly worth exploring, Mike. I think the community conversation about whether to have a inverted commas standard flips around between individual guidance documents and presentations like this. So any viewpoint in the UK context is always going to be very useful, with the journey that MARTA have gone through, to help us reflect on the scenarios we have.
Yeah, I think we all.
Thank you, Derek. And Derek, I want to also address that in the wider range of the transit world here, with the various transit authorities that seem to be popping up in around Manchester, Liverpool, the West Midlands, East Midlands. It's a growing field. Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Dave, you were going to say something?
No, I think they were spot on. This is a leveraging opportunity, because I think this sharing is going to open up, different agencies. I'm an owner, operator, ops guy, systems engineer, practitioner. But I think, this sharing of strategies and what's working and what's not working, even failures and discussions between these organizations is going to be very important. So I look forward. You know, I love the APTA peer program where we go and take a handful of people and we assist other agencies, and we get a box lunch and big cookies, and the rest of the time we're working our tails off doing information exchange with other agencies and consultants and properties. So I think this team, this group, this knowledge base, there's tremendous opportunity here.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also to that end, I think that we are going to be able to better inform the SE handbook rewrite, which is about to happen. We've already had conversations, and I'm not sure if anybody from the infrastructure working group's on the line, but we've had conversations of combining our efforts, combining our forces, and kind of having a different look at the way the handbook is written and the way we can actually reference this APTA standard in the handbook. That opportunity is now open to us with the MOU, and that could be quite an exciting event. Of course, we have to write the standard, or the proposed standard. I guess it's a candidate document, but yeah, I think that that's sort of some exciting things that are coming up, and I'm hoping that will stimulate additional folks to jump on board, and even if they don't have time to write, maybe they've got time to review. So I'm just going to put that out there to everybody. If you're not comfortable with the time required to write stuff, or if you just have a few bullets you want to throw at us, we're happy to try to massage that into the standard. And if you do have some time to do some review, the more the merrier in that regard. So I think we're at our time. Dave, did you have any other closing thoughts?
No, Dale. I think we covered plenty today.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody, especially Dave, because I know he's incredibly busy, and Dennis and Derek and all the other folks that helped put this together. And I really appreciate your contributions. And we'll try to keep the information flowing back and forth across the pond and back and forth across North America transit agencies as well. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, take care.
Thank you, Dale. Have a good evening or afternoon.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers.
Misty Stender's watching you guys over here.
Well, hopefully
Take
we
care.
were. Yeah, thanks.